My mother of blessed memory used to say that wherever there are two Jews, you will find three arguments. How well this describes the complex and challenging internal conflict in Israel today over the future of the state, the structure of the judicial system, the role of traditional Judaism. While I am deeply troubled by the ongoing internal conflict, division and factionalism are not new to Israel or to the Jewish community. In many ways, this is the best of times for Israel, as Israel experiences rapprochement with nations that were mortal enemies. Israel has become a crucible for innovation and growth, especially in the fields of medicine and technology, earning Israel the title Startup Nation. And we see as well an engaged populace. That weekly protests for the past 9 months have drawn out hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Israelis showing civic engagement on a scale that is difficult for us to fathom. I believe in and hope for an Israel that is the fulfillment of the vision expressed in Israel's Declaration of Independence. An Israel that will, and I quote, foster the development of the country for the benefit of all the inhabitants, based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel, ensuring complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. Israel's Declaration of Independence was an aspirational expression of the hopes of its signers, the founders of Israel. And their vision has not yet been fully realized. Literally, the Declaration of Independence declared that Israel's constitution would be adopted by October 1st, 1948. Nearly 75 years later, Israel still has no constitution and finds itself on the verge of, or even in the midst of, a constitutional crisis. There is a struggle and tension between the ideal Israel described by the mostly secular founders and the earthly Israel that's inhabited and led by secular and religious and ultra-religious Jews, multiculturalists and nationalists, people who do not all hold the same vision for the future of Israel, where complete equality of social and political rights is guaranteed to all inhabitants. The Talmud records a rabbinic conversation about two Jerusalems that are bound together. There was the heavenly or the ideal Jerusalem and the earthly Jerusalem. Written in exile, the rabbis of Talmud were imagining a return to the holy city of Jerusalem and to the promised land as a whole. 20th century social justice activist Label Fine reflected on the two Israels. In Yerushalayim Shel Mala, the heavenly or ideal Jerusalem, when it rains, the flowers bloom. When mouths open, choirs of angels sing. And in Yerushalayim Shel Mata, the earthly Jerusalem, when it rains, streets turn muddy and slippery. When mouths open, it is as often for curses as it is for blessings. People love and laugh and push in line. Some cheat on their taxes, and some perform acts of great kindness. Our arrival in Israel this summer was an earthly experience of Israel. We landed at Ben Gurion Airport exhausted from a 12-hour overnight flight. We stumbled through passport control and baggage claim and walked past dozens of hawkers to the legitimate taxi stand. After loading the taxi, I noticed that there was no meter. And I remembered an important lesson from past trips to Israel, that it's important to negotiate the fare before you put all your bags into the taxi. I quietly agreed to the fare that was quoted by the driver, which was double the fare that several websites had suggested. Everyone else fell asleep as we sat in traffic and wound through the gleaming streets of Tel Aviv. Traffic aside, it was a taste of the ideal Israel. I was amazed by the vitality, the innovation, the growth, the bustling scenes of commerce and culture. Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, imagined and inspired Tel Aviv's planners to design a European-style metropolis in the Promised Land with wide, tree-lined avenues and central squares reminiscent of Berlin or Vienna, but set along the Mediterranean coast. On the radio, Israel's U21 soccer team held their own in a match against Germany. We arrived at our destination and unloaded, and as the taxi started to drive away, Samson shouted that his carry-on bag was missing. I chased our taxi through winding residential streets, and I know that I'm the picture of perfect fitness and health, but I somehow managed to keep the taxi in view for 3 blocks until it reached a major thoroughfare, turned, and was gone. I slowly walked back to our family, dejected and trying to catch my breath as Samson shared the contents of the missing bag. There was some cash, and there were all the toys that we had brought to entertain Samson and Asher. We had no record of our taxi driver. It seemed unlikely that we would ever find the driver or see the bag again. Gone was the glorious return to Israel that I had hoped to experience in the land of milk and honey. The next morning, I woke up determined to find our missing bag, partly on principle and partly self-preservation. Our boys wanted their toys. Knowing that calls to the airport and taxi dispatcher would be better with coffee and a well-fed family, I started walking to the nearest cafe. As I opened the door, our missing bag was sitting in the entryway. Without our knowledge, without seeking a reward, our taxi driver had delivered it in the early morning with toys and cash intact. It was a small act of kindness and a taste of the heavenly Israel. Our second week in Israel, we stayed at a hotel in East Jerusalem owned by Arab Israelis. For all my time in Israel, including a year of rabbinical school, spent living and studying in Jerusalem, I had spent very little time in the predominantly Arab Israeli communities and neighborhoods of East Jerusalem. Many friends and colleagues expressed surprise and even concern about our safety and well-being. The driver who brought us from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was visibly concerned when I shared our final destination, I had only told the dispatcher that we were going to Jerusalem near the Old City. Since we are now outnumbered by our children, we'd arranged for an Israeli-American college student to help us with our children for several days during our 2-week stay. When we shared where we were staying in Jerusalem, she was instantly concerned and unsure of how she would travel to our hotel. We came up with a solution. She would arrive and depart only by taxi. When we were in the Jewish sections of Jerusalem and requested taxis to our East Jerusalem hotel using an Israeli app similar to Uber or Lyft, our drivers always seemed to be named Ahmed, Abdullah, or Mohammed, Arab Israelis. But when we needed taxis elsewhere in Jerusalem, our drivers were Moshe, David, and Shmuley. It was explained that Jewish Israeli drivers were uncomfortable driving into East Jerusalem. On Shabbat, we hiked in a national park near an Israeli settlement in the West Bank, otherwise controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Some cars in the parking lot bore license plates issued by the Palestinian Authority, while others had Israeli plates. The other hikers we encountered were secular Israeli Jews, Palestinians, and Arab Israeli Christians. It was an oasis of unity in the Judean desert. As we returned to our hotel, our bus driver insisted on taking a shortcut. And I gulped as we passed a gigantic red warning sign that read in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, "This road leads to Area A, which is under control of the Palestinian Authority. The entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden, dangerous to your lives, and against Israeli law." As Shabbat concluded that evening, we ate dinner atop the Notre Dame Pontifical Institute, the Vatican outpost in Jerusalem overlooking the Old City, serenaded by Muslim calls to evening prayers as the moon rose over the hills. Another taste of the heavenly Israel. Earthly signs of the ongoing civil unrest in Israel were everywhere, with posters covering apartment windows and porches, especially in Tel Aviv, always accompanied by an Israeli flag. At the playground closest to our apartment, lampposts were decorated with bumper stickers with an Israeli flag and the slogan, "Ein ga'ava b'li demokratia," meaning there is no pride without democracy. People protesting the proposed judicial overhaul march with Israeli flags and end each protest by singing the Israeli national anthem, Hatikva, the hope, an expression of their hope that Israel's leaders will preserve the democratic values and the judicial system that have defined their nation as the stronghold of democracy in the Middle East. Marching with Israeli flags and singing the national anthem is a demonstration of their continued pride in Israel. A reminder of the good, the hope of the protesters that Israel will resist demagoguery and remain a democratic state. There is bad, there is more good, and there is hope that the good will win out. From our hotel room in East Jerusalem, I could see the Jewish neighborhoods of West Jerusalem and the Arab Israeli neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, and I thought of a poem by Yehuda Amichai. On a roof in the Old City, laundry hanging in the late afternoon sunlight, the white sheet of a woman who is my enemy, the towel of a man who is my enemy, to wipe the sweat of his brow. In the sky of the Old City, a kite. At the other end of the string, a child I can't see because of the wall. We have put up many flags. They have put up many flags to make us think they're happy, to make them think that we are happy. I experienced two Jerusalems, East and West, Arab and Jewish, all Yerushalayim Shel Mata, the earthly Jerusalem. And then on our last night, we went to Jerusalem's first station, a newish cultural center built at a previously abandoned 19th century railroad station. As we walked past shops and Zumba classes, restaurants offering dishes that were kosher and halal, we watched Arabs, Muslims and Christians, and Jews, secular, modern Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, Israelis playing and eating and Zumbaing and riding the carousel together, recreating peacefully in the same shared space. It was Yerushalayim Shel Mala, the heavenly or ideal Jerusalem. In Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan explains that God will enter the heavenly Jerusalem only after first entering the earthly Jerusalem. Created in God's image and seeking to emulate God, how could we expect to experience the heavenly or ideal Israel without first experiencing the earthly Israel? Too often we focus on the bad, the conflicts, and assume that good can exist only on a similarly massive scale. We miss the small acts of kindness and good, the taxi driver who returned our bag, the lifestyle center where a diverse group of Israelis came together to enjoy life, the protesters who marched with the Israeli flag, hopeful for the future of their democracy. Recalling the vision of Israel's founders to foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants and ensure complete equality. It is that vision of Israel Shel Mala, the heavenly Israel, that I am thinking of today on Rosh Hashanah, reflecting on my visit to Israel, reflecting on everything happening in Israel. In the words of Israel's national anthem, Od lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnot alpayim. Our hope is not yet lost, the hope of 2,000 years. While this is the best of times for Israel in many ways, Israel needs our support now more than ever. And the nature of our support can evolve past the purchase of Israel bonds and the ubiquitous blue J&F pushkis of my youth. If the words of Talmud are true, we cannot experience the ideal Israel without first experiencing the earthly Israel. We need to visit Israel, to study Israel. And there are many wonderful organizations in Israel promoting justice and equality and a bright future for Israel. The Israel Religious Action Center and Women of the Wall fight for equality and are securing civil rights for a just and egalitarian Israel based on Israeli law and Jewish tradition. The Jerusalem Foundation is investing in the development of East and West Jerusalem across religious and cultural lines, supporting projects that bring Israelis of all backgrounds together, like the first station I mentioned. For all the frustration and concern we experience from afar, for all the anger and fear that Israelis experience up close, we can still have hope for a return to civility and democracy, to a bright future. In Israel's internal conflict, there are echoes of the growing political divide, persistent injustices, and systemic racism that we witness in our great nation as well. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, our tradition guides us to reflect and consider our shortfalls and growing edges, where and when we have missed the mark. In my darkest moments of concern, I'm reminded that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, and I am filled with hope and resolve to not accept the world as it is, and to continue working towards the ideal world, the world of justice, freedom, and peace, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. We may encounter bad, and yet we know there is still much good, and hope ultimately that the good will win out. This is true for Israel, for the United States, and for our lives in the year to come. We will draw closer to Israel by continuing our indefatigable support for Israel, by appreciating and learning more about the complexities of life in earthly Israel, by checking our assumptions and approaching Israel with an open mind, by visiting Israel, by listening and learning and seeking new experiences and perspectives, by maintaining hope for the two Jerusalems and the two Israels to become one, soon and forever. Amen.